One self alone exists eternally. There is no other. That is, there is no multiplicity of selves outside of yourself or within yourself. The conception of multiplicity is only delusion based upon misidentification, which has for its root the false assumption of an ego entity, an individual identity. One self exists of the nature of pure being, consciousness, bliss. It is unborn, it is unformed, uncreated, and imperishable. The idea of more than one self is only misidentification. If you mistake yourself to be a body, there will appear to be multiple selves. Are you the body? This is what should be known. in your spiritual practice, if your aim is to realize the self, which is the absolute or Brahman, you must ask yourself, are there two of you? One seeking to realize, and one that which is to be realized. Multiplicity of selves, such as yourself and the self, is born of misidentification, that is to say, delusion. In the highest sense, who is to realize what when all that there exists is this one self? What then is self-realization? It is undoubtedly knowledge of the self, such knowledge being not a perception, not a conception, but utterly non-objective. With non-objective knowledge, the knowing and one's own being are identical. Because there are not two selves, the Maharshi laid the greatest emphasis for self-realization upon inquiry. Who am I? It is an inquiry into the true nature of the inquirer, and not the attempt to ascertain something objective to oneself. For whatever is objective to you is dependent upon you, and is merely false appearance and ultimately completely unreal. It is an inquiry as to who you are. If you wish to realize the self, first know your own self. If you know your own self, the your own part will vanish. For the ego is not real. Individuality is not real. And what remains is pure being, which is itself the knowledge. If we treat in our minds self-realization, or the self, as if it were apart from our own self, our own being, then we will seek it as if it is some kind of mental mode, as if we are in one mode, and we will later be in another mode, a state of ignorance and a state of knowledge. But the knowledge which is eternal, the knowledge of the self which is infinite and eternal, is not a mode of mind. It does not occur within a mode of mind. It does not even occur within the waking, dreaming, and deep sleep states. It does not occur. For it is not an event. Not being in time, it is indestructible. Since this knowledge is one with your being, therefore inquire within yourself, what is it in you that neither wakes nor dreams, which does not sleep, which has no objective attribute? What is it within you that is neither perceived nor conceived? If you determine like this within yourself, you will have found yourself. And that which you have found, you yourself are. No new self will have been produced, nor will you have been transformed from one thing into another, though all the bondage and suffering, which are a result only of delusion, will have vanished. Inquire within yourself and cease to misidentify with a body or a mind or the very idea of I. You cannot be what is objective. So who are you? Inquire. If you wish to merge with Brahman, or be in union with God, who are you that seem to be broken off, that you would later merge or have union with that? Question that very identity. If you inquire non-objectively in this manner, the I and all else which depends on the I ceases to be for you, because it had no real existence. It is the unreal alone that appears to cease. The real ever is, just as it is. That reality alone knows itself. Brahman alone knows Brahman. There is no other. The self knows the self. There is no second, no other. It is for this reason that in the Karika, Gaudapada says, there is no creation and no destruction, and no one bound, no one desiring to be free, no one practicing, and no one liberated. If you have a question this morning, at any point feel free to ask. If you wish to relate your own experience, at any point feel free to speak.
Yesterday, I got a bee sting, I had to be transported by ambulance to the hospital. In the ambulance, I thought, well, this is it. And so I started meditating, and I figured that everybody knew what they were doing to this body. So I just asked myself, who am I? And what is my existence? And it was a point where I could see that the mind was agitated, and the body was agitated because of what was going on with it from a feasting. And I felt very separated from it. And the same thing happened at the hospital when my blood pressure went up to 235 over 120. I just went, well, I guess this is it. I can expect to pass away any moment. So the only thing for me to do is to meditate. So I just went to myself and I could see that I wasn't a body, and I wasn't the mind or the agitation or anything that was going on. I felt totally separated from all of it. And I don't even know what to say about it other than that. I didn't know if I needed to take the meditation any deeper or how to take it deeper at that point, because I was already looking within myself to see who I was, or what my existence was, and waiting for the body to either have a stroke or a heart attack at that point. And just watching everything going on, because there was nothing that I could do or control or anything. There was nothing in my control. So I think the only question I have is, at that point, when you actually believe that that's going to happen like any second, how else to take the meditation, or to take it deeper, how to take it deeper if it's needed.
Aren't you at that point all the time?
Yes. Yes, what I'm thinking is that it's the thoughts that came afterwards, about how to take the meditation deeper, because at the time that the physical events were happening, I was quite aware of everything, and I was quite aware of myself. I was very aware.
You were very aware of that you were not the body and the mind. You were also very aware of the urgency or the importance of remaining free from the body and the mind and realizing your real existence. That importance should not wane. If the sense of importance does not wane, the desire for liberation will be strong. Since liberation consists of self-knowledge, you need to know your own existence. If you are not the mind and not the body, nothing perceived, nothing conceived pertains to you. What remains of your nature? This was being addressed just a few moments ago. The existence you want to realize, and you. What makes up that you? That's where your inquiry should be pointed.
The you like the ego I?
Someone has the body and the mind, and that is called I. You've divested that I of the body and mind, so what remains of I? If you inquire in this way, that I will be consumed or swallowed up, so to speak.
I think that's what I was trying to ask you, because I have been doing the meditation looking into the I.
Then pour your mind inward into this inquiry as to who am I, fueled by the intense desire for liberation. For it is as important now as it was then.
There comes a point in the meditation that I feel as though that I need to surrender. Because the inquiry just seems to go just so far. And just surrender.
What do you mean by surrender?
Letting go of the sense of God. As, letting go is the best way I can explain it. To look deeper within that I.
And how will you let go of that? If you do let go of it, won't you still remain as I?
Yeah. It seems as though wherever I'm going to go, I'm here. I don't know where here it is.
Is here in this world?
Yeah.
Then where is here when we say, I am here? What is this here? If your senses cease, and there's no vision or experience of the world, are you still here? If so, where is here? If your mind ceases to think, indeed it is only thinking that's called the mind as if it were an entity. If that thinking ceases, are you still here?
Here.
If you ask who is here, both the I and the here, the forms of such, vanish.
Yeah.
Either inquire so that the eyeless true I alone remains, for that alone is real. Or, as you mentioned, surrender. Then God alone is. And nothing remains of you but God. In either case, the sense of I and mine vanish. I, my mind, my body, my life, my death. That I, that my, or mine, that is what vanishes.
During that event, it didn't seem as though any of it was mine.
So can you take repossession?
Is it a real?
If you do, isn't it only imagination? The idea I am a body or the body is mine, it's only imagination.
Yeah.
Likewise your thoughts, my thoughts, or that you are what you think, it's only imagination. How could you be a body? How could you be what you think?
Last night's meditation, I felt as though I was imagining everything.
If imagination ceases, so does creation. Since nothing that is imagined can go with you, you might as well be detached from all that is imagined even now. Since that with which you might misidentify really never has anything to do with your existence, you might as well remain disidentified even now. since in the freedom from attachment and misidentification, your own innate bliss shines, the innate peace shines, you might as well experience that even now.
That's what it was during the hospital, at the hospital, in the ambulance. There was peace. In the middle of chaos, it seemed like.
Yes, first it seems like in the middle of the chaos there is peace. Later it is as if there's a drop of chaos in the midst of vast peace. Finally, there's only just peace. There's never any chaos. Do not let the experience fade in memory. Oh, the phenomenal portion of it will. The sensory portion will fade away in due course. But the lesson about the importance of liberation and something about what your nature is, that should endure. Go on inquiring into the nature of your own existence.
I've been thinking a lot about, even Maharshi talked about, obviously the main advice was inquire, but he also said the importance of pranayama, the importance of meditation and so on. The scriptures and other great teachers, and it's one thing to intellectually understand that we are that. In my view as a non-realized person, I have samskaras, I have to fry them through samadhi, I have techniques that I can use to be able to do that, controlling the prana and so on. I was always confused about what he really meant when he said inquire, because one can intellectually understand that you're not the body, you're not the prana, you're not the mind, you're not the buddhi, you're not the ego, you're not the bliss sheath, but so what? That's intellectual, right? So I'm trying to figure out, was he, when he was first surrounded by people, obviously those were very lucky and advanced souls, so was that just inquire because people were, again, from a position of ignorance, I know this is not the right metaphor, but were 1 inch away, and if one isn't that because of lots of impressions, then is it still the right thing to operate and do things, even though there's really no need to do anything and there's no seeking and all that stuff? That's great to say, but if one hears something and remembers something from childhood and ties it in, there's an impression there. My understanding from the scriptures is that the only way to get rid of that is samadhi. I don't know if that makes sense.
Samadhi indicates utter absorption in the self.
Right.
That means that the separate individuality has vanished, or is dissolved. The inquiry should not be mistaken to be some kind of activity of vijnanamaya kosha, sheath of the intellect. There's nothing intellectual about it at all. Why did the Maharshi recommend the inquiry? He said it was the only method that did not include the duality one is trying to transcend. Not that other methods are ridiculed. If they are of assistance to you, use them. But in the end, you must come around to knowing yourself for that samadhi. For that samadhi to be sahaja, innate, effortless, natural. There's no point in saying there's nothing to seek. And rarely will you hear such teaching like that around here. Seeking, don't do anything, etc. That is generally a misconception and not what the truth is. The Maharshi advised to inquire and to know oneself. You do not require intellectual analysis to know that you exist. We should start and end right with that existence. It is purely experiential and not theoretical. When you so inquire, even your comprehension of what the scriptures advise becomes very much clarified. Because you come to understand them from the same position as the rishis who uttered them.
What does inquire mean? I mean, that's what I'm trying to figure out. What do I do? I mean, is it just to be, to when you have that experience of purity and
Well, how are we going to just be?
Well, sometimes I think we all have, right, in between thoughts or whatever for various lengths of time, we have the experience of being. Is it just kind of groove on that? I mean, is that what inquiry is? I could never figure out, I read all the books 10 times, I could never figure out what do you really do? Because people would ask him, should I just keep saying it over to myself? It's obviously not that. As you said, it's nothing intellectual. What is it?
A moment ago I mentioned that you exist. You know that you exist. And the way you know you exist is what? It's inseparable from the existence itself. You know that you are. That knowing should be turned in on itself rather than coursing through imagined objects. In other words, now the mind is accustomed to objective vision. Make your vision non-objective. It is taking the sense of existence itself and tracing that out within yourself. You may wish to have some kind of detailed instruction booklet, so to speak. But how can detailed instruction be given for something that is non-objective? There is precision in the Maharshi's instruction. In that sense, it's marvelously detailed. But it is all of a non-objective or non-conceptual character, just as you are. You exist, you know that you exist. But what else do you add to that existence in your mind's imagination? All the stuff that is I and that belongs to the I. You should relinquish the misidentification with that. The relinquishment is in knowledge. There's no additional technique, no additional letting go, letting be, or any other such thing. If you know yourself, then you are just as pure being, pure existence. Yes, it shines in deep sleep between two thoughts, but it has not varied or become other than what it is during any other state or any other thought. If it seems as if there is a change, high moments, low moments, what makes the change? Question yourself. Examine your own mind. What do you assume to be yourself? What do you assume to be real? It then results in what you regard as a lower, more bound, or more conditioned state. The one thing illusion can't stand is such inquiry, such examination. It's like bringing a light to look for darkness.
Thank you.
I've been reading from the requisites and appreciating the necessity to have a deeper understanding of the source of happiness in order to disentangle myself from pseudo or mistaken entities or identities rather. And in meditating on that, I can then see more clearly that those ideas are ideas and not truly who I am. They come and they go, they sort of substitute each other. When one isn't present, the other will be present. So that discrimination comes back in, which is the substratum of detachment, and only that which is always present, only eternal, is the real. So that was helping me disidentify from that. Also, reflecting upon what you said last Sunday, that the Absolute is one, continuing to read from Rig Veda to Ramana Maharshi, and also collected works. Several things. One is the absolute, in Ramana's writings and in the other book, how he had no separate will. How he simply was at the tide of bliss that swept him up. He totally, there's no resistance to it. That was what was his pulse of his life, it would seem. And when he didn't remove his leg from the hornet's nest, he just had total detachment, but also total service, it seemed to the Absolute, to Arunachalam, in every action, severe or gentle, it seems.
In one sense, what you're speaking of means we should question as to who is Sri Ramana Maharshi. If we see him as the name implies, Maharshi, great Rishi, we see a wondrous sage. But who does he say he is? If we approach with an eye of devotion, we see one dissolved in an ocean of bliss, absorbed in the Supreme. But who is he? If we approach seeking wisdom, then he's a knower among all knowers, a sage of sages, a guru of gurus, a sadguru, a true guru who can reveal the truth. And he is also Bhagavan, meaning he who has Bhaga, which is a set of attributes of glorious spiritual splendor, the one who has a knowledge of the ignorance and knowledge, bondage and liberation, beginning and end of all beings. But who does he say he is? In expressing his own existence, he resorted to Maunavak, silent speech. If you comprehend that silence, you yourself are the silence, and you cannot stand apart to know him. Thus he remains always ineffable. As for ideas replacing each other, yes, they come and go. This indicates their transient nature, because you do not come and go, they do not have anything to do with you. You may wish to further examine and see in their coming and going, do they come and go of their own? Or do you conjure them up? Do they declare themselves to be real, or do you say, these are occurring? Are they there waiting for you, or taking turns marching past you? Or do you conjure them up? If you conjure them up, from what basis are they conjured?
It's clear within me that I conjure them up in the sense that I lend reality or identity or happiness to them.
But are they existing there that beforehand, and then you lend your identity or reality to them? Or do you imagine them? And in the very imagining, lend your identity and reality.
You mean misidentify with the mind, and then some kind of idea or attribute, and then...
Is the mind pre-existing, or does it have its source?
Well, it has its source.
What is that source? This is what you have to find out within yourself. If you examine your own mind in the course of inquiring, you will find that There's no such thing as a separate entity called a mind. And that your thinking, your way of thinking, is based on your identity. What you define yourself as determines the manner of your thought.
If I define myself as some kind of limited, separate ego entity,
then you're going to have problems.
right, that's when the trouble starts spinning out. And inquiry is always turning one's mind or eye back in upon itself.
So the Maharishi said that the I was the root of the whole mind, and with the rise of I, all else rises. With the cessation or subsidence of the I, all else subsides. So then it is not a case of all else is there and then the I just hops onto the stage, so to speak, and gets entangled.
The I first is and like you've mentioned there, Maharishi, the assumption. I've seen the notion of assumption is very, there isn't too much definition to it, but it sort of comes over. In my experience, it comes over me sometimes, but I'm starting to recognize it more for what it is, rather than like, this is just normal, and then farther down the line having to undo the chaos.
But is it ever normal? No sooner does ignorance arise than you start looking for a resolution. No sooner are you unhappy that you seek your real nature of happiness. There's nothing ever normal about samsara. Trace your ideas, your ways of thinking, back to your definition or ideas of identity. Then inquire, who am I? And determine what you really are. That will destroy the tendencies or vasanas at their root.
Thank you, Master. I wanted to check with you on, it seems that sometimes it's right to, or at least effective, to make discrimination simpler and sometimes more detailed, so as to make it more thorough in all ways. Just two quick examples would be, if I find myself looking for the unreal nature of the ego and it seems like I'm getting a little too mental on it, it seems that the simple thing is just make sure I'm not identified with the body. I mean, that's like the grossest, most obvious symbol of the ego. If it were like a cancer, then that would be the tumor. It's right there in front of me. If I'm still identified with the body, I can start right there. And then it's just sort of on the other point, if I'm looking at the nature of the mind as a happiness-seeking device, almost like a program, say, sometimes I get caught up looking at the big happinesses and the big unhappinesses, but then it seems useful to look at the little unhappinesses and the little happinesses. So, for instance, if I feel myself repelled from what I deem the tedious and attracted to what I deem the fascinating, I really want to see that that's all mind, that's thought overlay, that the real fascination is always the real, and the real non-tedious is always the real.
What makes for the big or small happiness? The happiness sounds, from what you're describing, sounds as if it is the same thing, but they're different degrees. What makes for big and small?
I guess the energy of the thought overlay, in a way. I mean, if it's heavy, I can turn a feeling of bliss into a feeling of sorrow if I'm really throwing a lot of thought on it.
That's not a skill you want to develop.
No. No, I'm not saying that as a strength. I'm saying it's more like the strength of the cancer again, not the strength of discrimination.
So the happiness does not change, only how thick or heavy the overlay or the superimposed thoughts are. So that the more thoughts or ideas, false ideas, you superimpose upon the happiness, the smaller it becomes. If it gets too small or too limited, it begins to feel as suffering, and then if you pile more ideas on top, it becomes greater and greater suffering. So you're not dealing with different kinds of happiness. You're dealing only with degrees of superimposed notions.
One of the things I was trying to get to is I think I've sometimes had the assumption that the little things don't count, that there's nothing that can be done about little feelings of tedium or little feelings of fascination, when actually it all counts. It's all thought projection.
The same self is there the entire time. Wherever being is, there is its bliss, since being and consciousness bliss are one and the same thing. There is never a time when you're required to be unhappy, in any sense.
Or fascinated in an illusory way.
With what are you fascinated?
Some external that gives me the sense, oh, this is fascinating.
But what is it that you're fascinated with? The external objects keep changing.
Well, that's what I'm trying to turn back into, that the fascination is the real. So I'm seeing a weak reflection of the real in it, and I'm running for the reflection.
So the intensity of your own reality gets fascinated with its own bliss. You don't have to do anything with the fascination.
Right. It's a waste of time.
No, the fascination is just fine. Just eliminate the superimposed objective portion.
Right. So I guess what I'm
What
trying to say
remains
is
is
even
then-
the little stuff is a waste of time. It need not be taken for granted. I don't only have to meditate on the big happinesses and the big unhappinesses. In other words, recognizing the real and love and recognizing the illusion and sorrow. Even the little stuff is a good place to meditate.
Yes, because the same existence is there the whole time. So the same bliss is there the whole time. The same, to put it this way, opportunity to be absorbed in that bliss is there the entire time, regardless of whatever your body's doing, whatever the activity is, whatever the situation is. It should be abundantly evident that outer circumstances do not create happiness. If we see that clearly, then outer circumstances can create no suffering for us. What is existing the whole time is the great self, so its great bliss is there to be experienced the entire time. Every single moment is profound if you're turned within to know yourself. As for little and big in the mind, there is no such thing as an idea that's too big that you cannot destroy it. But there is no misidentification or attachment that's too small that you should ignore it and keep it.
One analogy that comes to mind is if one is sort of spending time with, let's say children, and there's a lot of love there. The activities can be very commonplace, and then the little squabbles or troubles can be very tiny too. But the immensity of the feeling of love and the happiness is not measured by the size of those little interactions. And then all of life is like that.
Yes.
So similarly, I was thinking about what you were talking about in your discourse about two selves. And I was thinking, okay, well, when I meditate and I take, okay, here I am as an ego entity, trying to get to another self that's deeper, higher. However, that reality that I'm kind of, there's no separation. The self is always there. I mean, this is kind of a fundamental teaching. So it's not that I'm really getting, from getting out of this self into a better self, the super self. But it seems similar to what Jay was saying, talking about, that, this whole thing about happiness, myself, or reality, it's much closer. And also too, I was meditating on the reading on Friday. This, the fact is that all this is composed of the self, even if it kind of appears otherwise. It's not different. You know,
What
even
did
though it has to be
Shank-
discovered as that. I
What
mean, I'm
did
not saying,
Shankara say? He said it appears different only due to Maya.
right.
But he also indicated Maya had no existence or no
Yeah.
power.
Yeah. That's pretty deep. If you could see that it actually has no power, then you're in a pretty good place.
Maya must be for someone. In Brahman, there's no inherent Maya. How close are you to the self?
You know, that closeness, first of all, if I hear a discourse from you and meditate on it, it seems like my experience goes deeper. However, I have an illusion, or, you know, sometimes when I'm practicing, where I believe that it's otherwise. Where it seems like, okay, that this, you know, sort of like exactly what your discourse started out, you know, the two selves. Even though I actually didn't see it quite that clearly, but it's actually was cool to actually notice, okay, I'm actually sort of seeking something outside of myself and not actually examining kind of that whole bubble.
Is there anything outside of yourself? When you say you so seek, is it outside of the consciousness, which is yourself?
Yeah. Well, that's a mistake. Seems like if it's outside, then
Where is outside?
in this particular case, it's something outside of what I'm taking myself to be.
Which is?
Well, I don't know, just a thought, a body, whatever.
No, what are you taking yourself to be? A thought?
Yeah,
A body?
yeah,
You know about that?
yeah.
Then how can you be that?
Yeah. Doesn't make any sense.
Do you really believe yourself to be a thought?
The reason I hesitate is because I get fooled by that. I don't know. I mean, because
In what way do you get fooled?
well, the two self theory, right? Right. I think there's
The
another.
one
self.
who now knows about this two self theory,
Uh-huh.
is he a plurality?
No.
Doesn't your sense of existence always feel singular?
Yes.
Can that be a thought?
No.
Does your knowing or knowledge of that existence require a thought? Do you cease to exist if you don't think, I am?
No, that's not the case. But it is interesting because I do think that there is some acknowledgement, I don't know,
What do you mean?
acknowledgement from thought. thought is going to stamp approval of this self. Are we going to, it's going to be a reflection of the self.
All right, a reflection. Does the original depend on the reflection? Does your face come into existence only when you see it in a mirror?
That doesn't make sense.
The one who knows thoughts is neither proved nor disproved by any thought. Moreover, thought has no existence apart from the one who knows it. So in truth, the nature of thought must be of the same nature as that which knows. In other words, if it has no independent existence, it has no existence at all. What is it that you call thought? Proceed by direct experience. What is thought? Who are you?
I think when you say proceed by direct experience, that eliminates all the thinking aspects. But they don't seem to be that different, because a thought doesn't seem to exist as I normally think of a thought, as a separate entity.
Like all this universe.
So every thought, when you say the entire universe. Inclusive of me.
What is meant by me?
Yeah, no different if it's from. So if it was conceived of as different, that would be a mistake.
Differentiation is only conception. And the conception is without substance.
Without substance. That's because in reality, there is no substance behind it.
Because the real ever is, and the unreal has never come to be.
So now the two self thing. So
is there one to know or not know another?
that's
मन्दश्रुत्वापि तद्वस्तु न जहाति विमूढतां निर्विकल्पो बहिर्यन्तात् अन्तर्विषयलालसः.
Even hearing the truth, the man of dull intellect does not give up his delusion, though through suppression he appears devoid of mental activity. A craving for sense objects lurks within him.
ज्ञानात् गलितकर्मायो लोकदृष्ट्यापि कर्मकृत् नाप्नोप्यवसरं कर्तुं वक्तुमेव न किञ्चन.
He whose work has ceased with the dawn of knowledge does not find an opportunity to do or say anything, even though in ordinary people's eyes he is doing work.
क्वत्तमः क्व प्रकाशो वा हानं क्वचन किञ्चन निर्विकारस्य धीरस्य निरातङ्कस्य सर्वदा.
For the wise one who is ever immutable and fearless, where is there darkness, where light? Where, moreover, is there any loss? There is nothing whatsoever.
क्व धैर्यं क्व विवेकित्वं क्व निरातङ्कतापि वा अनिर्वाच्य स्वभावस्य निस्वभावस्य योगिनः.
Where is patience, where is discrimination, and where even is fearlessness for the yogin who is impersonal and of indescribable nature?
न स्वर्गो नैव नरको जीवन्मुक्तिर्न चैव हि बहुनात्र किमुक्तेन योगदृष्ट्या न किञ्चन.
There is no heaven and there is no hell. There is not even liberation in life. In short, nothing exists in yogic consciousness.
नैव प्रार्थयते लाभं नालाभेनानुशोचति धीरस्य शीतलं चित्तम् अमृतेनैव पूरितम्.
The wise one neither longs for gain nor grieves at non-attainment. His cool mind is verily filled with nectar.
न शान्तं स्तौति निष्कामो न दुष्टमपि निन्दति समदुःखः सुखस्तृप्तः किञ्चित् कृत्यं न पश्यति.
The desireless one neither praises the calm nor blames even the wicked. Contented and the same in happiness and misery, he finds nothing to be done.
धीरो न द्वेष्टि संसारम् आत्मानं न दिदृक्षति. हर्षामर्षविमुर्मुक्तो न मृतो न च जीवति.
The wise one neither abhors birth and rebirth, nor wishes to perceive the self. Free from joy and sorrow, he is neither dead nor alive.
निस्नेहः पुत्रदारादौ निष्कामो विषयेषु च निश्चिन्तः स्वशरीरेऽपि निराशः शोभते बुधः.
Glorious is this life of the wise one, free from expectation, free from attachment for children, wife, and others, free from desire for the objects of the senses, and free from the care of even his own body.
तुष्टिः सर्वत्र धीरस्य यथा पतितवर्तिनः स्वच्छन्दं चरदो देशान् यत्रास्तमिषतान्यः.
Contentment ever dwells in the heart of the wise one, who lives on whatever happens to come to him, and who wanders about at pleasure, resting wherever he is when the sun sets.
पतदूरे तु वा देहो नास्य चिन्ता महात्मनः स्वभावभूमिविश्रान्ति विस्मृतशेषसंसृतेः.
Reposing on the foundation of his own being and completely transcending birth and rebirth, the great souled one does not care whether his body dies or is born.
अकिञ्चन कामचारो निर्द्वन्द्वश्चिन्न संशयः असक्तः सर्वभावेषु केवलो रमते बुधः.
Blessed is the wise one who stands alone, who is attached to nothing, who is without any possession, who moves freely and at pleasure, who is free from the pairs of opposites, and whose doubts have been rent asunder.
निर्ममः शोभते धीरः समलोष्टाश्मकाञ्चनः सुभिन्नहृदयग्रन्थिर्विनिर्धूतरजस्तमः.
Glorious is the wise one who is devoid of the feeling of mind, to whom earth, a stone, and gold are all the same, the knots of whose heart have been rent asunder, and who has been purged of rajas and tamas.
सर्वत्रानवधानस्य न किञ्चित् वासना हृदि मुक्तात्मनो वितृप्तस्य तुलना केन जायते.
Who is there to stand comparison with the liberated soul who has no desire whatsoever at heart, who is contented and indifferent to everything?
जानन्नपि न जानाति पश्यन्नपि न पश्यति ब्रुवन्नपि न च ब्रूते कोऽन्यो निर्वासनादृते.
He but the desireless one who knows not though knowing, sees not though seeing, and speaks not though speaking.